Hi everybody, this is a follow-up for the Week 8 workshop. We looked at Assignment 2, what it would be like in a real-life Year 7 classroom, and we talked about how we can embed numeracy into our English classroom. Just recapping the second assignment, it's due by midnight next Friday, just emailing it to my QUT email address. You're developing the resource and writing a roughly 1,000 word essay about whether or not you think that teachers are prepared to teach Year 7. If you have any questions about the assignment, please feel free to email me throughout the week. We did a little bit of peer feedback, and then we moved on to looking at what it will be like in a Year 7 classroom. So you need to be thinking about how you would design your own classroom. In terms of the physical layout, how would you arrange the desks? What would you have on the walls around you? And what rules and procedures would you teach your students? Remember that you do need to teach your students what you expect of them. So if you want them to line up outside the classroom before each lesson when their bag's outside, and if you want them to bring in particular things to your class, you need to teach them those things. You need to teach them how you want them to respond to questions that you ask, whether it's raising their hand. You need to teach them things like whether or not they can move out of their seat to put things in the rubbish, all those small things that we might take for granted, we need to be really explicit about. There are some useful ideas in The Art and Science of Teaching by Mazzano. It's an ebook that you can access through the QUT library. If you particularly focus on Design Question 6, The Art and Science of Teaching has 10 design questions. Design Question 6 is the one that we can apply here. What will I do to establish and maintain classroom rules and procedures? So classroom routines and the physical layout of the classroom for learning. So that might give you some ideas. For your prac, mostly you'll need to go along with what your supervising teacher has in place. But if you have your own ideas, of course you can negotiate some changes temporarily with your supervising teacher. So just consult with them. The lesson that we're pretending that we're doing today is from a unit on Australian poetry, and the assessment piece is to compile an anthology. This lesson comes very early in the unit in the orientating phase, probably the third or fourth lesson. So remember, this is a Year 7 classroom. For Year 7, we know that Year 7 students need quite a lot of structure and routine, so I would have them line up outside in 2 lines, leave their bags outside. I'd remind them what they need to bring in. I would spend a couple of minutes while we're outside just having a chat to students, greeting them, and then I'd invite them inside. I always stood at the door and said hello to them as they came inside. Being outside with the class while they're getting ready is a really great opportunity to have some informal discussions with the students, chat to them about what they've done on the weekend, or if you know that they were in some sort of school sporting event or a musical event, you can talk to them about that. Another tip is if you've had trouble with a student in the past lesson, go up to them and have a chat with them and tell them how happy you are that they're there, how you're looking forward to seeing their best work today. So really try and build the rapport in those couple of minutes outside of the classroom before class gets underway. It can really set a good tone for the class. Okay, so then of course you'll begin your lesson with a recap of the past lesson. So I can say that in the last lesson we looked at an introduction to the unit and what your assessment's going to be. I gave you your unit spelling list, and of course my spelling words would have all been in context with Australian poetry. We did a poetry scram, and then we looked at what a ballad was. Now I might do a quick 5-minute revision activity here. I might do something like a quiz, get them to chat to a partner, get them to reread the notes that they made. I might do a quick game. I might do some direct instruction by putting up a slide from the last lesson and just running through that, or I might give them a practice task. So I would spend around about 5 minutes just revising what we did last time, refreshing their memories. Students will often have trouble remembering what they did last lesson, so it's so important to refresh their memories. Even if it's really clear for you and you couldn't imagine how they possibly could have forgotten, chances are they have. They just need some prompting to come back and focus on what you're doing in English. Oh, also, can I just mention here, particularly with the younger grades, Year 7 and 8, you might teach the same class for 2 different subjects. So you might teach them for English and social science. They'll often have trouble remembering what you're learning in each subject. You can be learning about the Industrial Revolution, and they'll still ask you, is this English or so? So they get a little bit confused. So if you do teach the same class for different subject areas, you do need to make it really clear that this is English and this is what we're learning about. This is a concept that you might have seen before. It's called the WALT and the WILF. It's just a different way of doing learning objectives. So the WALT is, what are we learning today? Well, today we're learning how to read a ballad, how we can comprehend a ballad, and how we can perform poetry. The WILF is what I'm looking for. So I'm looking that you can make connections between the text and yourself or other texts on the world. I'm looking to see that you can explain what happened in the ballad that we're going to read. And I'm looking to see that you can effectively recite the first stanza of a ballad. So by the end of this lesson, I hope that you will be able to recite one stanza of the ballad and that you'll know what this ballad's about, what the story is. The ballad that we're going to read today, and we're going to spend a couple of weeks looking at this text, it's called Mulga Bill's Bicycle, written by A.B. Paterson. Now in the workshop I did a guided reading lesson. I've put a link to a training video on YouTube under the Week 8 resources. So it's about a 35-minute video showing you how you do guided reading. You could also Google guided reading and that will give you some ideas about how you go about guided reading. It's such an important thing to do whenever you're going through a text with students, which would be at least once a week. So I read the text to the class. So what I'll do now is just spend a couple of minutes talking as if I'm doing this guided reading lesson with you. Now you will be shouting answers back at me as I ask the questions. You'll be putting your hand up, you'll be calling out, getting so enthusiastic about this story here. Okay? So I'm holding the book. I've arranged the class so that everybody's sort of sitting around together, so that we're all nice and close and we're reading a text together. Okay, so I'm holding the book. Okay, it's called Mulga Bill's Bicycle. So looking at the picture on the front of it, what do you think this story could be about? We could look at his facial expression and this man, and there's a big bike there. Do you know what those bikes are called? Penny farthings. Okay, so we do some predicting. So what do you think this story is going to be about? What gives you that idea? How do you know? Sorry about the dodgy photo of it. I didn't have a scanner, so I've just taken a picture of it. And my big brother drew on the book, so about 20 years ago, but we can still see it. Okay, so let's start reading. 'Twas Mulga Bill from Eagle Hawk that caught the cycling craze. He turned away the good old horse that served him many days. He dressed himself in cycling clothes, resplendent to be seen. He hurried off to town and bought a shining new machine. So what kind of person do you think Mulga Bill is? What kind of personality do you think he has? And we would talk about that. We'd talk about his body language. We could look at the horse, and we could look, what do you think the horse thinks of Mulga Bill? One thing I forgot to do, which I haven't scanned in the page, but we also talked about what era we think that this story is set in and how we know. So we can look at how we know whether or not it's a modern day text or if it's set in the last century. Oh, this is okay. I've put them in the wrong order. Yeah, this is the one where, okay, so we looked at, well, what time do you think that this story is set in? Okay, so we've read this page. Sorry, I've gone a bit out of order now. We're back on this page. Okay, so he dressed himself in cycling clothes, resplendent to be seen. Now, what do you think the word resplendent means? And then we could talk through with students what those kinds of words might mean. When you get to know your students, you'll probably know which words they might have trouble with. So there are a range of things that you could do with that. One option is before you read a text with students, you can make a little glossary for them with those words and the definitions. Okay, so you can do that before you read the text. You could do it on the whiteboard together. You could get them to write a sentence using that word in their book. So you can do some vocab activities around new vocabulary. Okay, so we went through and we finished reading the story. If you're not familiar with it, it might be a good idea to have a read for yourself. This is a text that's currently being used in Year 7, so it is a current text. I've put the full text in a Word document under Week 8 resources, Learning Resources Week 8. Alright, so we're focusing now on processing this text and understanding it. So I'm going to give you two choices. You're going to be working on your own to summarise the poem. Your first choice is to summarise it like this, where each line adds a new word. So you're writing 7 lines that summarises the story. For example, Mulga, Mulga Bill, Mulga Bill's bike. Probably not quite that. And you don't have to have Mulga at the start of every line. But the idea is that you summarise the story, and I'll show you an example in a minute. Or you can choose to write a paragraph of around about 50 words that summarises the story. Another option is just to get the class to chat to a partner and give them 30 seconds to summarise the story, and then swap and the other partner summarises the story in 30 seconds. So this is a written way of doing it, or you could do a verbal summary with a partner. So I gave the class 10 minutes to work on this. Here's one example. Bill farewells horse. Bill buys bike. Bill confidently sets forth. Bill's bike has other ideas. Bill's bike crashes into the creek. Bill, shaken, returns to his faithful horse. So that's a summary of the text. Okay, now because remember that we need to really scaffold students' learning, particularly in Year 7. So we're doing another activity now to help them process the text. Again, it's solo time. We're doing the making connection strategy. We did this in week 3. So if you can't remember what this is, you can pop back to week 3 under the learning resources, and there's a PDF there. Now I'm using a Venn diagram, and I would ask students to choose any 2 of these. So they can do text to self. So how does this text relate to me? Is there a time in my life when I've tried something new and I found that I really wasn't very good at it, so I went back to what I was familiar with? And you could write that down there. And then they could choose whether they want to compare that with text to text or text to world, and anything that they had in common will go in the middle here. So that's just another way to process the text. The great thing about making connections is that there's no wrong answer. It can't be wrong, it's just what the students think, and it really validates their prior knowledge. So that was 10 minutes. This activity was 10 minutes, and we spent around about 20 minutes reading the text. So already we're up to 40 minutes, and this is planning for a 70-minute lesson. Okay, now the last activity that we're going to do in terms of processing the text is to construct a map. Now you're going to work with your elbow partner. So that's the person on either side of you. You're going to go through this story and make a map of where Mulga Bill goes with his bike. And you're going to use symbols and labels. You're going to put a title at the top of your map. So to scaffold this for students, we could go through the text as a class and we could highlight all the places that Mulga Bill goes. That's one way to differentiate. Okay, so highlight that he went to the creek, that he saw the wallaroos, all the different things that he saw that you would need to put into a map. I'll show you 2 examples of what we came up with in the workshop. So this is one, the route of Mulga Bill's disastrous bicycle ride. Eaglehawk, okay, and it goes shop, okay, all the way to the end where he ended up in the lake. And this is another one. So that's a way to differentiate. There's some visuals in there for students. I would then display these around the room. I'd leave them up there. If you had early finishes, we talked about what you could do. You could get them to colour it in. You could get them to add speech bubbles about what he might have been, or thought bubbles, what he might have been thinking as he went through the town. So always be thinking, what can I do? What can I have early finishers do? So that's 20 minutes. And then the last part of the lesson, we're going to learn with an across the room partner, so somebody on the other side of the room. We're going to learn off by heart the first stanza of Mulga Bill's bicycle. And we're going to focus on tone, volume, facial expression, and rhythm. So by the end of this unit, I would hope that students might be able to recite the entire ballad. Okay, and when we start In the next lesson, I could ask, right, who remembers how the first stanza goes? And I could get them to stand up and rattle it off. You could make it a sort of fun challenge that you incorporate into each lesson. Then at the end of the lesson, we link back to the start of our lesson where we looked at the wolf and the wilt, the Walt and the Wilf, so and asking them how they went today. You can use a thumbs up, a horizontal thumb or a thumb down, and ask them how they think they're going. So you could say, how do you think you understand the story? Do you understand what Mulga Bill's bike is about? And they could show you with their thumb how they think that they're going. Now, throughout the lesson, there's so much opportunity for you as a teacher to wander around through all these activities and find out how students are going. It should be pretty easy to work out whether or not, formatively assess whether or not students understand the poem. There's opportunity for you to sit down with them, give them some sentence starters. When you're doing the map, go through the poem with them line by line and help them work out where Mulga Bill went and what he did. So by the end of this lesson, it should be pretty clear how your students are going with understanding the text. From here, depends what the goal of your unit is, but I might now look at the poetic devices that are in Mulga Bill's bicycle, or I could look at the concept of rhythm. Okay, so that's what we did for a little while. We went through a practice Year 7 lesson. The last part of the workshop, we talked about numeracy in the English curriculum. Now, there's a study being done at UQ in 2013 that suggests that poor numeracy is even more significant than poor literacy in terms of how well people can participate in society. So these authors argue that we really need to focus on numeracy. I'm going to just give you some really practical strategies, okay, about how you can incorporate numeracy, what it looks like in English. Akara gives quite a broad definition of numeracy. Numeracy encompasses the knowledge, skills, behaviours and dispositions that students need to use mathematics in a wide range of situations. It's very broad. Let's look at some more specific examples of those range of situations. And I thought about it, and this comes from the same text here, the different levels. So quite basic things. We need numeracy to be able to do our shopping, pay the bills, budgeting. Then on a slightly more complex level, dressmaking, planning a holiday, designing a garden. And then if we look at the macro level, being able to understand political decisions, if we're talking about health, education, economics, they're often justified using information that requires mathematical knowledge to understand and interpret. So there's different levels of numeracy in real life. Akara has, actually I think it might be QCAA. Yeah, they've got indicators for years 7 to 10. So the link for this is in the PowerPoint. And you can just have a bit of a look over the kinds of concepts that your students are working towards. And remember that numeracy is in the Australian curriculum as a general capability. It's something that in every subject area it should be spoken about and embedded. Okay, so this is one strategy. It's the pro snowball. Now that's what we did with Mulga Bill's bicycle when we did the summary in 7 lines. Okay, so 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. That's a really basic numeracy strategy. This one's a little bit more complex. So you asked, and you might do this more with senior students, more so than year 7s. So you ask students to choose 6 words, and hopefully there will be words that have multiple meanings. So hand, trip, crack. Then you label the words from A to F, and then you write a story. You write a 7-paragraph story, and those words appear within that story, but they have to appear in this order. And in the second paragraph, they appear in this order, and so on. The goal is for pupils to write stories of 7 paragraphs with their chosen words appearing in these given sentences. There is an example that you can look at here. This is just an extract of it. what you could do is then go back through a text and try and work out what the original words were based on what you're reading. So that's a numeracy strategy that you can use. This came from a government document. It's this one here. So it's Australian Government for Literacy and Numeracy Week. It's got across the curriculum, so it looks at how we can embed numeracy into all of these subject areas. So the ideas, if we're doing a media unit, for example, we could be doing a survey about TV. So think of 5 questions about TV, ask 10 people to record their answers. You could use a tally. Tally is a numerical concept. Turning things into fractions, percentages, recording information in graphs. If you're looking at newspaper articles, which you're bound to at some point with all year levels, you can focus on these kinds of numeracy ideas about the dates and times, the numbers of people involved, statistics. Then you could, in your questioning, how long ago did it happen? If 20% of people in Australia are obese, how many people is that? How far away and in what direction? What does the graph tell me? Just through your questioning, and you have to ask these kinds of questions anyway, really, to help students understand and comprehend the text. You could do a plot graph for a novel or a film. We could have done with this with Mulga Bill's Bicycle, making a graph that plots the events. That's maths, numeracy. And lastly, Poets Through Time, we could do a timeline of poets. So if we were doing a unit on Australian literature or Australian poetry, even just if we were doing lots of Banjo Paterson poems, we could make a timeline that plots when each of those was published. Just in case you were interested, Mulga Bill's Bicycle was published in the Sunday Mail in July of 1896. Okay, so that's all we had for numeracy. Hopefully that gives you just a bit of a jumping off point with some practical ideas of what numeracy in English looks like. Now I'm just going to give you a few pieces of more general teaching advice that I've just thought of over the last couple of weeks. I've just made some notes. So when you're on prac, try and observe as much as you can and try to go to different faculties. So go and watch a drama lesson, a PE lesson, a dance lesson, a home ec lesson, just to see how different faculties manage a class. If you're in a classroom with a kitchen, what kinds of procedures happen? If you're out on the oval and you've got sports equipment, how does a teacher manage students being all over the place? And particularly with sport, inevitably you're going to end up with a sport lesson anyway, so it's good to see how teachers differ across faculties. And you get so many ideas. So make sure that you're on top of your planning, but if you do have spares, ask your supervising teacher if they could arrange for you to go and observe some different lessons and chat to those teachers. Get involved with your professional associations. ALEA, the Australian Literacy Educators Association, is a great one for English teachers, for all teachers. I think there's a student membership for $40, and I've put links to that under the useful links on Blackboard. Also the English Teachers Association, I think that's only $50 or so for a student membership. They often run PD that you can go to, and they send out journals, newsletters, lots of practical ideas, and they also often sell really practical resources that you might like to look at. This is just a tip for when you're giving instructions. So when I was getting students to do the summary activity earlier, instead of saying, okay, I want you to write a summary about, and then I carry on explaining, if I've said, I want you to write a summary, you might find that a lot of students pick up their pens and start writing down straight away, and they actually miss half of the instructions because they've already started. So an easy way to get around that is to say, when I say go, I want you to, and you give them the instructions for the activity, so I want you to write a summary of the story in a 50-word paragraph, then say go. So that way you've captured their attention, given them the full instructions. You might get a student to parrot back what they need to do. So say, Joe, can you tell me what I'm asking you to do right now? And get them to put it in their own words just to check that they understand, and then say go. Never sit down in the class unless you're sitting down, with a student or at a table with a group of students. But don't sit in the corner of the room and watch. Always be walking around, constantly walking around, looking over kids' shoulders at their books, chatting to them, monitoring, clarifying, extending. Always on the move. Don't sit down in your classroom. Don't sit at the front of the desk or at the back of the desk. Always be moving. Postcards to parents is a nice relationship building strategy. Every Friday, I would send a postcard home to parents, 3 different parents. So it could be even for students who you might have had a bit of trouble with previously. If you can pick up on something really great that they've done that week, send a postcard home and tell their parents about that, or make a phone call home. I used to, if I had to ring some parents about behaviour problems, I would always make the last phone call a positive one, where I'd ring somebody's parent and tell them, oh, Gabby did a really great job today with her assignments, or she worked so hard, or she was helping her friends so much. Give some sort of positive feedback. But yeah, the postcards are good. I used to just do a little template on the computer and I'd handwrite them and then post them home. Some schools have actual, properly printed school postcards that you can use. So that's a nice rapport building activity, or something that you can do as a teacher. A 2-minute intervention is something that I've used a few times with students who I've had a few troubles with in the classroom. Every day for 2 weeks, you seek the student out and you talk to them for 2 minutes. You just chat to them about anything you can. Something that they did well in class, something that they've done on the weekends. Find out something about them. And you will find over those 2 weeks your relationship will transform. Okay, you might see them in your class 3 times a week anyway, so just make the effort at some time in that lesson to have a chat to them for 2 minutes. And then you might see them in the playground, on the 1 or 2 other days of the week that you don't see them in class. Okay, but take interest in that student. Try and find something endearing in every one of your students, and the 2-minute intervention is a nice way to do that for students who you might have a little bit of trouble with. On your roll, you can put a star next to every student you know something about outside of school. So try and find out something about all your students, something that they're interested in, something that they're good at, something about their family. And lastly, the 1 out of 3 is some advice that my principal from my last school gave me that she was given when she was at uni. And it's in the interests of preserving your well-being and making sure that you don't burn out. If you make one lesson just whiz-bang, fantastic, so exciting, kids love it, they will forgive you for the other 2. So don't burn yourself out spending 3-4 hours preparing every single lesson. Make 1 lesson a week fantastic. Students go away thinking, wow, that was great, I love that lesson. They will forgive you for the other 2 if they're a little bit more mundane. Okay, it's so easy to plan and plan and plan, but you will burn out. You've got to look after yourself too. So 1 out of 3 is a really good rule. Alright, so that's all we had for this week. You're working on your assignments that are due next Friday. So if you have any questions, as I said, please email me. Yeah, that's all I have. Okay, see you.